There is a specific kind of lie that democratic governments tell, not the kind that requires fabrication, not the kind that requires inventing facts that do not exist or attributing actions to people who did not take them. That kind of lie is relatively rare in sophisticated governments because it is fragile. Fabrications leave traces, invented facts can be checked, false attributions can be contradicted by the people they were attributed to. The specific kind of lie that democratic governments tell, the kind that is most durable, most institutionally supported, and most damaging when it finally collapses, is the kind that is technically true in a narrow, carefully constructed sense, while being functionally false in every sense that democratic accountability requires. It is the kind of lie where a Pentagon spokesperson can stand at a podium and say, in clear and unambiguous language, that the Department of Defense has no special operations forces conducting missions in Sudan, and that statement, while not accurate in the way the question was intended, does not technically violate the perjury standards that govern official statements to the press. This is not a loophole the system accidentally created. It is the system's primary design feature. For 6 months, from April 2023, when Sudan's civil war erupted into violence that killed tens of thousands, displaced 8 million people, and produced what the United Nations described as the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, the Pentagon maintained that denial. For 6 months, the system held. And then a journalist in Europe, who had subscribed to a commercial satellite imagery service and spent several weeks systematically reviewing imagery of Sudanese military installations, published a photograph. The photograph showed vehicles with United States military configurations adjacent to Sudanese Armed Forces installations in Greater Khartoum. Movement patterns inconsistent with Sudanese military personnel, consistent with small advisory team rotations. The system had been running for 6 months. The satellite image cost approximately $40 a month to access. Today I am going to show you what was inside those 6 months of denial. Not just what the Green Berets were doing in Sudan, though we will get into that precisely, but the specific architecture of how the American military constructs and maintains a denial, why that architecture is not accidental, what it costs when it collapses, and what the Sudan episode reveals about a system that is not running in Sudan alone. Because Sudan is not the exception, Sudan is the template. And somewhere right now, in a country whose name will not appear in American newspapers until the crisis is already underway, the same system is running. Let's get into it. Before the denial can be understood, the mission has to be understood, because the popular image of special operations forces, the night raid, the hostage rescue, the targeted killing, represents a fraction of what these operators actually do, and an even smaller fraction of what they do in Africa. The primary mission of United States Army Special Forces on the African continent is foreign internal defense. The training, advising, and partnering with African militaries to build their capacity to address security threats without requiring direct American military involvement. The unit involved in Sudan was the 3rd Special Forces Group, based at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The same unit whose operators have been rotating through African partner force missions for 2 decades. Their area of responsibility covers West Africa and, in coordination with other commands, the East African theater that includes Sudan. Foreign internal defense is not a passive mission. Advisors work alongside partner force officers and NCOs. They observe planning sessions. They participate in logistics reviews. They watch the movement of troops and equipment. Through sustained daily contact, weeks, months, they develop an intelligence picture of the institution they are working inside, its internal dynamics, its capability gaps, its command relationships, its intentions, an intelligence picture that no external collection method, no satellite, no signals intercept, can fully replicate. The Green Berets were in Sudan, working with the Sudanese Armed Forces, the SAF, the conventional military under General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who was simultaneously the head of Sudan's transitional government, not with the Rapid Support Forces, the militia commanded by General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hemedti, who would become the primary antagonist in the civil war. The Green Berets were inside the institution that started the war. For 6 months after the war started, the Pentagon said they had never been there. This is the part of the Sudan story that the official acknowledgement, issued in the carefully limited language 6 months after the denial became unsustainable, and never addressed directly. What did the advisors know? And when did they know it? Picture a Special Forces warrant officer, a weapons sergeant fluent in Arabic, on his third deployment to the African continent, sitting in a planning room of a Sudanese Armed Forces Brigade headquarters outside Khartoum in February 2023. He has been working with this unit for 4 months. He knows the senior officers. He knows which ones are competent and which are not, which ones are loyal to the institutional chain of command, and which ones have relationships with political figures outside the military, which ones go quiet and professional when the subject turns to the RSF. On this morning, the conversation is about logistics, specifically ammunition resupply timelines for the brigade's heavy weapons platoon. The conversation is routine in tone. In content, it is not routine. You do not discuss ammunition resupply timelines for heavy weapons, in the detail being discussed in this room, if those heavy weapons are going to remain in their current positions for the foreseeable future. He makes notes. He does not ask questions that would reveal to the Sudanese officers that he understands the operational significance of what is being discussed. He is an advisor. His role is to advise on training and capacity building. He is not formally tasked with collecting intelligence on the partner force's operational intentions. But there is no way to sit in that room, hear that conversation, with that training and that experience, and not understand what is being planned. He writes his report that evening. The report travels up the Special Forces chain of command, through the 3rd Group's intelligence section to AFRICOM in Stuttgart, into the analytical products that inform National Security Council deliberations. The ammunition resupply is completed 3 weeks later. The war starts 6 weeks after that. The United States government knew the conflict was coming, not from satellite imagery, not from signals intelligence collected from outside the country, from advisors sitting in the same rooms as the commanders who were planning it. This is what 6 months of denial was designed to protect. Here is the detail that transforms the Sudan denial from operational security into something more structurally significant. A special operations mission of this sensitivity is classified as clandestine military activity. The designation permits the military to conduct operations without public acknowledgement. Personnel are under orders not to confirm their presence. The operational unit is identified in internal documents by a cover designation that does not appear in public military records. Financial transactions are routed through accounts whose connection to the specific mission is invisible in the budget documents that congressional oversight reviews. None of these elements is individually illegal. Each has a legitimate operational security justification. Together, they create a system in which a senior Pentagon spokesperson can stand at a podium and say that the Department of Defense has no special operations forces conducting missions in Sudan, and that statement, while not accurate in the way the question was intended, does not technically violate perjury standards. This is not a design flaw. This is the system working as intended. Every press query about Sudan was routed to the senior spokesman with a recommended response that confirmed nothing, denied no specific claim, and referenced standard language about not commenting on special operations activities. The system held for 6 months. But here is what the architecture of the denial also did, and this is the cost that the official narrative, even after the denial collapsed, has never fully accounted for. The intelligence the Green Berets were generating, the specific granular, on-the-ground reporting about SAF preparations, commander intentions, unit readiness, and operational timelines, was classified at a level that limited its distribution to recipients with specific need-to-know authorizations. The State Department's Sudan diplomats did not have those authorizations. They were crafting diplomatic interventions for a crisis they could see developing through open-source reporting, without the specific picture about commanders, units, timelines, and triggers that the Green Berets reporting contained. The secrecy that protected the mission also severed the information flow that might have enabled intervention. The operational security framework that produces 6-month denials and the policy process that might have used the intelligence to prevent the war were running in parallel, separated by a classification wall that the system had constructed and the system had no mechanism to remove. The denial stopped holding not because of congressional pressure, not because of internal conscience, not because the Pentagon decided the operational security justification had expired. It stopped holding because of the commercial satellite imagery market. Planet Labs, Maxar Technologies, Black Sky. Companies operating constellations of small satellites that revisit every point on Earth multiple times per day, producing imagery whose resolution would have been classified as a national intelligence capability 15 years ago. They sell subscriptions. The journalist who broke the Sudan denial was not working with leaked classified material. He was working with a subscription service and systematic methodology, reviewing imagery of Sudanese military installations in the weeks before and after the April 2023 outbreak. What he found was not ambiguous. Vehicles with United States military configurations, movement patterns inconsistent with Sudanese military personnel, physical evidence of American presence corroborated by a second source, a communication intercepted by a European intelligence service and passed through channels its origin service could not fully control. He published the imagery. He published the communication alongside it. And the Pentagon's Public Affairs Office, which had been routing Sudan press queries to standard denial language for 6 months, received a call from a senior defense correspondent asking not whether American Special Operations Forces had been present in Sudan, but when they had arrived and what specifically they had been doing. The question had changed. The denial that could be maintained against the first question could not be maintained against the second. Here is what the $40 photograph actually reveals. Beyond the specific Sudan mission, the classification systems that the American military uses to protect sensitive operations were designed in an era when the ability to collect physical evidence of military presence required nation-state intelligence capabilities, satellites operated by governments, signals intelligence systems operated by agencies. The barrier to corroborating a denial was high enough that operational security and plausible deniability were, for practical purposes, the same thing. That era ended somewhere between 2015 and 2020, when commercial satellite constellations achieved the coverage frequency and resolution that made systematic independent verification of military activity available to anyone with a credit card and analytical patience. The system is still running on the assumption that it ended in the era before commercial imagery existed. Sudan proved that assumption is no longer valid. There is a question that the official acknowledgement, issued 6 months after the denial became unsustainable, still never answered. What happened to the Green Berets when the war started? When the SAF and the RSF began fighting in Khartoum in April 2023, the advisors were embedded with the force that had just initiated combat operations. The chaos of the first days closed the airport. Planned exfiltration routes became unusable. Extraction required improvisation. They maintained communication with AFRICOM. They sheltered with partner units. They waited. The extraction took 72 hours. 72 hours in which United States Army Special Forces operators were inside an active civil war, sheltering with the force whose preparations for that war they had been observing and reporting on for months. While the official position of the Department of Defense was that no American Special Operations Forces were operating in Sudan. The denial was running while the extraction was in progress. This is the detail that most precisely illustrates the distance between what the system was designed to protect and what it was actually protecting in those 72 hours. It was not protecting a capability. Capabilities, as the satellite image proved, become known. It was not protecting the operators. The operators needed the extraction that the denial was making more complicated to coordinate through normal channels. What the denial was protecting in those 72 hours was the accountability gap itself. The structural space between what the American military was doing and what the American government was saying it was doing. The gap that, once acknowledged, requires explanation. And explanation requires accountability. And accountability is what the system was designed to defer. Now, look at what 6 months of denial cost in terms that outlast the specific mission. African governments are not naive about American military engagement. The ambassadors and defense ministers of nations that host American advisors understand that the American military operates in their countries in ways not always publicly acknowledged. They accept this because the operational benefits outweigh the political costs, as long as they are not placed in the position of publicly associating themselves with American claims they know to be false. African defense officials who knew American advisors were present in Sudan briefed through regional security cooperation channels, were placed in exactly that position. The American government was publicly claiming something they knew to be untrue. Acknowledging what they knew would betray an American confidence. Staying silent made them complicit in a denial that, when it unraveled, would associate them with American information management practices their own governments and publics have every reason to be suspicious of. Several quietly communicated to American counterparts that the denial was damaging the relationship, that the credibility cost was accumulating in ways that would outlast the specific operational secret it was designed to protect. The quiet communications were noted. The denial continued for 3 more months. This is the institutional response that reveals the true priority ordering of the system. Operational security first, allied relationships second, democratic accountability, a distant third, manage rather than served. Go back to the beginning. There is a specific kind of lie that democratic governments tell, technically accurate in a narrow and carefully constructed sense, functionally false in every sense that democratic accountability requires. The 6-month Sudan denial was that kind of lie, constructed through a system that has been refined over 2 decades of American special operations engagement in Africa, institutionally supported, legally defensible at every specific point, collectively producing an outcome that democratic oversight is supposed to prevent. The Green Berets who sat in Sudanese Armed Forces planning rooms in the months before April 2023 were doing their jobs, precisely what foreign internal defense missions are designed to do. The system that put them there was also doing what it was designed to do, embedding advisors inside an institution moving toward war, generating intelligence about that movement, classifying that intelligence at a level that limited the information flow that might have enabled a different outcome, and maintaining a denial for 6 months while the war the advisors had watched being planned killed tens of thousands of people and displaced 8 million. The problem is not the operators, the problem is the system, and the system's problem is not that it is ineffective. It is effective in ways that have consequences. Democratic accountability is supposed to evaluate those consequences. The 6-month denial was designed to ensure it could not. The war in Sudan killed tens of thousands. The Green Berets saw it coming. The Pentagon said they were not there. And the gap between those two facts, the gap between what the system knew and what the system said, is not the Sudan gap. It is the structural gap between American military power and American democratic accountability that has been widening for 2 decades of post-9/11 engagement in places the American public is not supposed to know about. Sudan closed. The gap did not. Somewhere right now, in a country whose name will not appear in American newspapers until the crisis is already underway, in a planning room whose walls will eventually be photographed by a satellite that sells $40 monthly subscriptions, a Special Forces warrant officer is writing a report that travels up a chain to a command center that is not publicly acknowledged to operate where it operates. The report is accurate, the picture it describes is specific. The classification level that limits its distribution to the people who might use it to change the outcome is exactly what the system was designed to produce. And when the crisis breaks, and it will break, the same spokesperson will stand at the same podium and deliver the same carefully constructed, technically defensible, functionally false answer, until the next $40 photograph arrives. If this analysis showed you what the 6 months of Pentagon denial actually reveal, not about Sudan specifically, but about the system Sudan is a window into, share it with someone who thinks American military engagement in Africa is limited to what the press releases describe. Subscribe, because we don't cover the acknowledgement. We cover the 6 months the acknowledgement was designed to erase.